We're here with Vernon Wells from F5 Networks to talk about automation. Vernon, welcome.
Thank you, Phil. I'm glad to be here.
So, talking about automation, that's a huge topic in just about every realm of the service provider space right now. Carrier networks are being asked to do a lot for their customers, and they're having to automate tasks in order to accomplish this. But what is putting automation in the spotlight right now?
The thing that you said is the important part, right? So service providers are starting to build these virtualized infrastructures, and what they're realizing is virtualized infrastructures are necessarily more complex than their hardware correlates. Yeah. And also when they were running these things on top of dedicated hardware, when they broke those out into virtualized instances, NFV instances, there's a lot more of them because they're smaller.
Right.
And so at some point, the size and complexity just becomes intractable. You can't debug, you can't deploy. But the other thing too, the reason why they're adopting this new strategy is so that they have high service velocity. They want to be able to create applications and deploy them rapidly. Well, that also necessitates some degree of automation, not just for the deployment, but also when things fail, you need to be able to fail around them quickly at speeds that are too high for humans to do in a manual way.
So just to get stuff to market on time and then to fix it while it's in the market.
That's right.
They're going to have to automate many of the processes in the
That's
carrier
right.
network.
And part of the challenge, I think the smartest service providers, they're developing these high velocity architectures so that they can, people say fail fast. This morning somebody else said pivot quickly, and I like that one.
Yeah.
The idea is that traditionally service providers, if they wanted to do an over-the-top service, it's years of planning and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and so a failure is catastrophic.
Right.
You want to be able to deploy things in months for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then if it fails, who cares? You just move on to the next thing.
Exactly, and I think part of the velocity part of it, you're creating more services, you're using more network components more quickly, because it's so heavily dependent on software programming and software development. It seems like open source would come into play here, because we're talking about a different set of economics on the software side. So walk me through how open source is important to this new reality for carriers.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people talk about open source, as you did, they talk about the economics of it, but software isn't free in the sense that somebody has to know how to use it and deploy it. But in this new emerging world of automation, open source software is really important, because software developers, software engineers have already been blazing this trail of automating complex, in their case, software systems for the last 5 or 6 years. And so they've developed this horde of tool chains around the processes that they've created. And a lot of times they favor open source software, things like Git and Jenkins and Ansible. These are the sort of things that they've been building their tool sets around. And so insofar as service providers want to adopt the same sort of processes to manage their complex systems, they're naturally going to be choosing the same tool chains that these developers are already using.
And you already referenced, a lot of things that have been important to the development of on the IT side of things. So another thing that really changed IT is DevOps processes. So what can service providers learn from and take away from what's happening on the DevOps side of things?
Well, these software engineers that I was just talking about that are blazing the trail, they're the DevOps guys, right? In order to get the fast build, test, deploy, feedback, update system that they've created, they've needed to merge together operations and development. That's the DevOps part, right? So they take a greater share and responsibility in building the plumbing for the systems that they're deploying. There's a similar paradigm for service providers and network-oriented people. It's called super NetOps. It's the same idea as you have for DevOps, but it's oriented towards a different system of complexity. Instead of software as the complex system, it's the networking infrastructure and the services built on top of them that are that complex system. That's what super NetOps is. And it's, again, this kind of merging of code-based systems, infrastructure as a code, and the actual systems that you're orchestrating. So super NetOps, like I said, they're going to be using many of the same processes, many of the same paradigms, and ultimately many of the same tool chains as the DevOps people have been doing all along.
Excellent. And how does and what does F5 bring to the table in terms of this kind of fundamental change that's going on inside of carriers.
Yeah, there's lots of ways that F5 participates. One of the biggest is we know applications. And right now, like I said, when you start talking about infrastructure as a service, it's not really true that the infrastructure is an application, but all of the facilities around it are driven by applications. And high availability in that space and security in that space, that's something we know very, very well. That's been our bread and butter all along. But more than that, we've been building really robust security systems. Part of this complexity that I've been talking about, it's related to the need for security. Everybody's talking about IoT and they're all very excited about how much money everybody's gonna make. You're building these gigantic attack bots. My boss always calls it the Death Star. I mean, there was an instance in the US where some cameras had been compromised, hundreds of thousands of these things, and you can launch massive denial of service attacks with those things. And the fact is liability lines are going to follow the deeper pockets, and the service providers are those deeper pockets. So whether they believe they have liability or not, they're likely to be encumbered with some of it. So security, we've always thought security is important. Now it's utterly critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been a great reminder for how exciting the IoT space is, the challenges that lie ahead for carriers, and the good news is that people have already been thinking along these lines and securing networks. Vernon Wells, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.